Any other senators wishing to vote or to change their vote? On this vote, the yeas are 51 and the nays are 45. 3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn not having voted in the affirmative, the motion is not agreed to.
Mr. President.
The senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, let me ask unanimous consent, if I may, for the Senate to proceed to a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, I will be closing the Senate very shortly. But before I do, I wanted to say a few words about a topic that came up today. Obviously, I was pleased that a majority of the Senate, indeed a bipartisan majority of the Senate, has just voted to eliminate an unfortunate gimmick in the tax code that allows people who make north of $250 million a year to pay lower tax rates than a Providence, Rhode Island truck driver pays if he's single. And I think that's pretty hard to justify, frankly. I think a lot of Americans spent last week preparing their taxes, and having heard from Warren Buffett, who one year paid an 11% all-in federal tax rate, a rate obviously higher than his secretary paid, something that Mr. Buffett himself has complained about, there's a pretty wide sense that the American tax code serves special interests and people who have phenomenal amounts of wealth much better than it serves regular middle-class taxpayers. And that's particularly true if you avoid doing what my Republican colleagues have done, which is to focus on the most progressive part of the tax code, the income tax, and ignore the most regressive part of the tax code, the part that hits working families the hardest, which is the payroll taxes. And almost everything they say about the American tax code conveniently omits the taxes that more Americans pay than the income tax, frankly. But we had a good discussion on that subject, and I think because it was so difficult for so many of my colleagues to come out in favor of an upside-down tax situation in which somebody making $250 million pays a lower rate than somebody making $100,000 or $90,000, other topics were brought up. We kind of had a march through all the possible topics one could practically think of, and one of them, very central to all of us here in the Senate today, is jobs. And it was pointed out that the tax fairness bill is not a jobs bill. Of course, it would be if you took the $47 billion to $162 billion in revenue that it creates and put it towards infrastructure, then it would create literally hundreds of thousands of jobs. But because it doesn't define where the revenue is going to go, I can't say that it is a jobs bill. It's a tax fairness bill. That was its intention. But we do have a jobs bill here in Congress. We have a very significant jobs bill. We have a highway transportation bill. The presiding officer serves with me on the Environment Public Works Committee and knows how hard we work to get that bill through the Environment Public Works Committee. It is exactly the kind of bill that people, I think, from outside of Washington, looking in at Washington, want to see us do. You had a chairman on the Environment Public Works Committee, Barbara Boxer of California, and a ranking member on the Environment Public Works Committee, Senator Inhofe of Oklahoma, who are from about as polar opposite political points of view as they could be. But they found a way to come together on this bill. They worked with all of us on the committee, and as a result, the bill passed out of the Environment Public Works Committee unanimously. Unanimously, every Republican and every Democrat. Then it came to the floor, and there are complaints from time to time around here that stuff gets jammed on the floor and there isn't enough of an open amendment process. There was 5 weeks of debate and amendment on the Senate floor of this bill. 40 amendments, more than 40, I think it was actually 41 amendments, were added to the bill either by vote or by agreement during the course of that. Republican amendments, Democratic amendments, and when the dust settled on the whole process and everybody had had their say and everybody had had their vote and all the amendments that could be considered were considered, we voted on it. And 75 senators either voted for it or were out of town and have said that they would have voted for it had they been here. So you had an effective vote of 75, I think, to 22. By our standards here, that is a colossal bipartisan landslide. And the bill itself was supported by everybody from the United States Chamber of Commerce, which is probably the most active Republican lobbying and political organization in the country, to environmental groups, to the laborers union. That this is a bill that everybody supports. And from a jobs point of view, it's 2.9 million jobs. It's 9,000 jobs in my home state of Rhode Island. This is a big deal. The bill was sent over to the other side, and there it sits. The Speaker won't take it up, and what I hear is it's because he doesn't want to count on Democratic votes. To somebody who wants a job or who wants a husband or a sister to have a job out working, rebuilding roads, rebuilding bridges, rebuilding highways, rebuilding our national infrastructure, it's pretty hard to explain why you'd walk away from a bill that creates 3 million jobs, that's bipartisan, that went through a full process in the Senate when they have no bill of their own, no bill whatsoever of their own, and do so because they don't want to use Democrat votes. That's sort of the ultimate Washington insider reason for not doing something important to the country. So when we talk about jobs in the Senate, until we get action in the House that creates a real bill, I don't think we should be getting any lectures about jobs from our Republican colleagues. I'm told that the House is passing another extension. And as the presiding officer knows, these extensions cost a ton in the way of jobs. And it's been estimated by our Director of Transportation that it would be 1,000 jobs lost in Rhode Island just from the extension that we have already agreed to through the end of June. If we pass that through the end of September, there goes the entire building season. And that's going to hurt. I spent time in Rhode Island when we were home and over the recess period with the Director of Transportation, who's a very able director. He's worked under Republican and now independent governors. And he describes that they have a list, this long of projects that they want to get done this summer in the building season. But if they don't know until July what the funding is going to be, he said, I've got to drop off a lot of those projects off the bottom. And when I do that, that's a lot of jobs. And it's unnecessary. We could be passing this bipartisan Senate bill through the House very quickly. Democrats would vote for it. Many Republicans would vote for it. And all those jobs would be able to start up right away. So if we extend it further into September, that makes it even worse. So it is really urgent that we not continue down a path of just delay and delay and delay of the bill. And it's not only me saying this. The folks at Standard & Poor's have just come out with a report that is titled Increasingly Unpredictable Federal Funding Could Stall U.S. Transportation Infrastructure Projects. They point out that as the construction season begins in the northern half of the country, This continuing uncertainty in funding could force states to delay projects rather than risk funding changes or political gridlock come July. Exactly what Director Lewis told me, that simply the uncertainty will move jobs off of the list that can be done in this construction season. The report continues that the political gridlock in Washington, D.C., i.e. the Speaker being unwilling to call up a bipartisan 75-22 Senate bill with Republican amendments and Democratic amendments and everybody supporting it, unwilling to call that up because he doesn't want to have to rely on Democratic votes. That's political gridlock for sure. And the doubts surrounding federal funding are making it difficult for issuers of financing for these projects throughout the infrastructure sector to define long-term plans for funding necessary capital projects. And then the report goes on to say, once a long-term authorization is approved, we believe it will provide an impetus for transportation agencies to reconsider high-priority projects that had been shelved because of lack of funding. But if the authorization is extended by even more continuing resolutions, such high-priority projects will remain in limbo. So jobs are at stake. It's a multi-million jobs bill. It's sitting over there not because of any problem they have with the bill per se. They don't have a bill of their own. It's not like they have something they prefer. I hear they're going to send over another extension to September, arguably with, if I hear correctly, with some politically very contentious issues attached, which makes it even more difficult. Remember, this was a bipartisan bill here on the Senate side, and that's where we're stuck. So I wanted to take this time this evening to urge my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle to use whatever powers they have of conversation or persuasion to get the House to call up the bill. And if we have to get this bill over, the alternative is that if it's only another extension and it's going to cost, I don't know, another 1,000 jobs in Rhode Island, we need to make sure that we get to, that it's a bill that will take us to conference, and that we get to conference as quickly as possible, and that once we are in conference, we pass a real authorization that avoids these problems as quickly as possible. The American people expect no less. It is not rocket science to pass a transportation bill. Congress has been doing this since the days that President Eisenhower established the Federal Highway Program. If we can't get this done, what does that say about our prospects of doing something complicated like cybersecurity or other issues that we'll have to face? This should be a slam dunk, particularly with a bipartisan bill that everybody supports that came through the Senate after such a clear, transparent, rigorous, and open process. So I will end my remarks there and move to asking unanimous consent that following morning business on Tuesday, April 17th, the motion to proceed to the motion to reconsider the vote by which cloture was not invoked on the motion to proceed to S-1789 be agreed to, that the motion to reconsider be agreed to, and that there be up to 10 minutes of debate equally divided between the two leaders or their designees on the motion to invoke cloture on the motion to proceed to S-1789, that upon the use or yielding back of time and the Senate proceed to that the Senate proceed to the cloture vote on the motion to proceed to S-1789 upon reconsideration.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, the Senate adjourn until Tuesday, April 17th at 10 o'clock a.m., that following the prayer and the pledge, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, the morning hour be deemed expired, and the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day. That following any leader remarks, the Senate be in a period of morning business until 11 o'clock a.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the Republicans controlling the first half and the majority controlling the final half. and that following morning business, the Senate resume consideration of the motion to invoke cloture on the motion to proceed to S-1789, the postal reform bill, under the previous order, and that the Senate recess from 12:30 p.m. until 2:15 p.m. to allow for the weekly caucus meetings.
Without objection.
I am advised to inform my colleagues that the first vote tomorrow will be at approximately 11:10 a.m. on the motion to invoke cloture, on the motion to proceed to S-1789. And if there is no further business before the Senate, I ask that it adjourn under the previous order.
The Senate stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
A Democratic plan to